Hi everyone, here's the Bookseller once again, and as some of you might already know, a few weeks ago, actually last week, the Future Fire Press published Fae Visions of the Mediterranean, which is an anthology of speculative, mostly horror, fantasy, short stories with a Mediterranean setting that is meant to showcase the diversity of the Mediterranean region. I can actually show you the tome because it arrived today in the mail, and one of my stories is in this collection. Now, to help advertise the collection, really to help the editors spread words about these anthologies, today I thought I might give you my personal top 5 of my favorite books with a Mediterranean settings. Some of my very favorite books, actually the top 2 in this top 5, I consider them among my very favorite books of all times. As I said, some of my favorite have a Mediterranean setting. Most of these books are going to have like Italy as a setting. I guess I have some kind of bias on that front. Of course, as usual with these videos, do let me know about your personal favorite books, novels, whatever, with a Mediterranean setting in the comment section below. Let's go with number 5, which is not a book, actually it's a series, which is the Montalbano detective series by Andrea Camilleri, which I understand is also quite popular abroad in English-speaking countries. And I don't know, as much as several other detective crime series set in Italy, I don't know why the country inspires murder in Anglo-Saxon people. A few years ago I was actually really addicted to this series and I really couldn't have enough of it. I read about one novel in the series per week, and since then I've actually kinda outgrown it. Now it's been ages since I last read a Camilleri novel. I think they are biased and flawed up to a certain point. I also think that Camilleri is as awesome a novelist as he is a rather dreadful short story writer. At the same time, I believe that especially the early titles in the series, and I'm going to give you in the description box a few suggestions as far as the early titles are concerned. I'm going to give you, of course, the English titles. Some of those novels are really well designed. The single cases are thrilling and rather interesting. At the same time, the characters are very well characterized and depicted, and you get interested in their lives as the series progresses. And especially, as far as this video's topic is concerned, the depiction of Mediterranean life and of life in these small Sicilian cities is really, well, amazing. Both because it shows you both the good and awesome sides of, you know, living in front of the sea and eating wonderfully every day, and of course the difficulties you have to cope with when you live in such generically, let's say, backwards places. Number 4 is one of the least known among Hemingway's works, which is Beyond the River and Into the Trees, which is Hemingway's Venetian novel. Not as famous as his Spanish ones or as A Farewell to Arms, The Old Man and the Sea, and those ones. In my opinion, one of his best ones, possibly his most underestimated novel. It's extremely beautiful and it depicts the, you know, usual Hemingway melancholic, depressive kind of atmospheres perfectly, and in particular it showcases a weird mix of joy and decay that mirrors perfectly, you know, the bliss and beauty and decadence of the city of Venice, which is a very weird place to visit, and it's not as like purely beautiful as many foreign people seem to perceive it, especially once you start living in it for a while. Hemingway's portrait of Venice is every bit as fine, as great as Thomas Mann's in The Death in Venice, except that River and Into the Trees is more fun than shooting yourself in the foot. The Death in Venice is not really. Also, I believe there is a sex scene in a moving gondola in Beyond the River, but I wasn't really sure, you know, because of Hemingway's usual style that tells you one word where 17 should be used. So let me know if I was mistaken when I read it the first time, or if I remember correctly. Number 3 is The Tempest by William Shakespeare, which is kind of an easy one, but yeah, it's set in the Mediterranean. And I know some of you might say that I'm kinda cheating because, you know, when people think about The Tempest and its setting, they usually think about the Caribbeans, the New World. That is actually what Shakespeare had in mind while writing it, but I'm still claiming it and putting it into this chart because it's theoretically set in the Mediterranean. The characters were traveling between Tunisia and Naples, I think. Some years ago, The Tempest was pretty much my favorite Shakespearean comedy. Since then, I've studied it rather extensively. I don't think it's as good as some of his other works. At the same time, there is one reflection in it I'd like you to focus on next time you read it or watch a performance of it, which is that, and this side to me is very, very contemporary and relevant in today's world, especially if you think about the Mediterranean and all the political implications of that area, which is that the motherfuckers on the island, you know, the politicians and kings and whatever, who are shipwrecked on the island, as soon as they land there, they start plotting again. They start plotting against each other, they start organizing murders and, you know, regicides and all sorts of shit. And they don't really realize, not really, that they are actually shipwrecked on a desert island and they'll probably die there unless some kind of magic Shakespearean shit is actually pulled out at the very last minute. And this is really, really fascinating to me, this idea that these people are so absorbed into their own world, into their own power plays, that they don't perceive the danger and, you know, the Damocles sword above their very heads. Very relevant, good job, Will. Othello, of course, is another awesome Shakespearean play with a Mediterranean setting. A beautiful version of it I saw recently is the one with Kenneth Branagh, by Kenneth Branagh, I guess. Do watch it, it's an awesome movie. There's also the guy from The Matrix in it, but not Neo, the Orpheus. Anyway, number 2 is Against the Day, one of my favorite books I read this year, one of my favorite books of all times, really, probably my favorite Pynchon, still not sure on that front, which has a Mediterranean setting. Like, claiming that this book has a Mediterranean setting is a bit like saying that by Bret Easton Ellis is about the 80s as a decade. It is largely true, but it doesn't really give you an idea of what the book is about. If anything, it gives you a wrong idea. Against the Day is set pretty much everywhere, including the American West and England and Asia, but large chunks of it, like very, very long passages, are set in Venice and in the Balkans especially, and in other regions of the Mediterranean, though not as extensively. And in my opinion, Against the Day showcases perfectly both the beauty of these regions and their more dreadful sides, whether we're talking about the revenge among families that were a staple of Balkan countries in the early 20th century, whether we are talking about the decay and the decadence of the city of Venice. Pynchon captures that perfectly. I think that the book is in many ways a perfect representation of the huge diversity of, you know, beauty and ugliness that the whole Mediterranean region is. And it's also, of course, a shitload of other things, all awesome. And it's pretty endless and it's complicated, and if you're not used to Pynchon, this might not be your best introduction into his works. Inherent Vice probably is, but if you are a bit experienced in Pynchon, it's a must-read. It's an awesome adventure, incredible. And finally, number 1 is The House by the Medlar Tree, which all Italians know as the Malavoglia by Giovanni Verga, which is pretty much the first adult novel I got into. I remember I got like really fascinated with the book when I was in the 4th or 5th grade, I think, and it's one of the gems, the hidden gems of Italian literature. It's one of those books many Italians hate because they were forced to read it when they were like 13 or 14, and it's of course not a book for kids, especially for 21st century kids. But it's awesome. One of the most striking features of the book is the fact that Verga wrote in the same language, in the same dialect, and using the same expressions and proverbs that the Sicilian farmers and especially fishermen who are at the center of the novel used in the late 19th century, which makes it a hard read for many Italian youths today. But still, it's written in that kind of language that manages to mix this dialect and, you know, all these expressions with standard Italian and make it a compelling read. A contemporary example of that kind of technique is The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, which is one of my favorite books of all times. That book too mixes English and street English, urban lingo with Spanish, with nerd jargon, and it creates a beautiful language that it's really really complicated when you read it a sentence at a time, but when you read the book as a narrative, it flows beautifully, and if anything, it makes you interested in the many languages that are used. At the same time, I have absolutely no idea how that kind of dialect is represented in translation, because I have never read the book in translation, so you are probably screwed and you won't appreciate that side. But there's more than language to The House by the Medlar Tree, because it's an awesome narrative of poverty and providence and the many ways in which life is probably gonna fuck you in the ass. The House by the Medlar Tree is up there with the best of Thomas Hardy in terms of 19th century cruelty against characters. It's one of those books that presents you a whole cast of characters you get involved in and you get interested in, and then starts doing horrible things to them in a fashion that makes George Martin look like Disney, really. It's a cruel read and it's kinda like depressing in its ways, but it's also amazing and terribly beautiful, both in its representation of country life and of the landscape of the Mediterranean, of Sicily. If you like the kind of cruel naturalism of, you know, the late 19th century, be it English, American, French, German, whatever, I warmly recommend this book. I'm sure you're going to love it. That's it for the chart. If you've read any of these books, let me know what you think of them. Let me know what your favorite books with a Mediterranean setting are. Do consider getting and reading Fae Visions of the Mediterranean. It's a great anthology. There are some really good stories in it. The editors did a very good job with it. Also, I filmed a video like last week, I think, in which I posted a call for reviewers, and I think some copies of the anthology might still be up for reviewers willing to get a free copy. I think some paper copies might be still available too, so if you're interested, do check out that video. Thank you so much for watching once again, guys. Bye, guys.